It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today, mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because you can't stay long. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today, mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come true, because they can't stay long. When I believe that you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe that you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe through every battle, through every heart, through every circumstance. I believe that you are my fortress. Oh, and you are my portion. You are my hiding place. I believe that you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe that you are the way, the truth, and the life. I believe that you are. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you that we are a child of yours, Lord. Thank you that even when school's not there, even when we can't be with each other, Lord, that we can still praise you, and Lord, that we can still be in community with each other through social media, Lord, through everything that you've given us, Lord. And I just thank you for all that you've given us, Lord. And I thank you that we can maintain this relationship with you, Lord. And I pray for all those who are sick. I pray that they would be healed, Lord, that you would help them with the process of them just coming to healing and being quarantined, Lord. I hope that you would, or I just pray that you would help folks not go crazy, Lord, and that you would just be there for them. Those that are quarantined, Lord, I pray that they would get everything that they need to survive. And I pray for those who are not yet quarantined, but that are being safe, Lord, being cautious, and Lord, are fearful. I pray that you would direct their attention towards you, and that it wouldn't just be fear that stumps them, that although we have to be safe, that we would still be in community with each other. And so I thank you and I praise you. Who am I that the highest in the world? I was lost, but he brought me in his hand. Oh, it's his love. Sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. of God. Yes, I am chosen, I'm forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, I'm forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, I'm forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Yes, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, always free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Let's pray. What's going on, Berean? Man, I miss you guys. I haven't seen you guys in a few weeks now, and we're going through a lot. And I just have the privilege of being able to speak with you today, and we're having these opportunities where we're able to, for so many of you, you're doing teaching online through Zoom and in other ways, and it's just interesting. And I love seeing your Instagram posts on so many of you and how you're having fun. And at the same time, it's interesting and ironic to see how many of you are missing school. But hey, as I started, if you don't know who I am, my name is Pastor Tony Sanchez, and I'm the pastor of students and families at Grace Fellowship Church. And at the same time, I love being the pastor at Grace, and I love being your pastor at Berean. We're going through a lot right now with COVID-19 and the way that it's spreading just on a daily basis, how we're having to stay home, and reactions that we're getting from a lot of people online, the fact that we have to stay home and not do some of the regular things that we've always been used to. And it's not just one area of a state or one area of this country or a specific country. This is impacting every single person on the planet. All over the world, people are being impacted by COVID-19. The impact is greater than when we tackled Ebola and SARS. It's going to be greater to our economy and our finances, probably even greater than what happened in 2008 with the housing market and when that bubble popped. And the impact, I believe, is going to be greater on an emotional, physical, and a psychological level like never before, which is evidenced by social distancing, which we're having to do, and by the social disconnection measures that we're having to take, where we're used to hugging and high-fiving and seeing people and having lunch with people. Even sometimes we're missing those people that we may not even want to have lunch with all the time or see at school. We at least would love to have that even now. And people right now are grasping for security because things are so unstable, and many are searching for answers because they want this sense of foundation. And I hear the word foundation, and I remember when I was 10 years old, my parents told me, oh, we're in the process and we want to work on buying a house. And finally, when I was 11 years old, my parents put a down payment, and right before I turned 12, I remember they started construction, and then we would go to this building project and this construction site, and it was a new construction, and my parents were excited. This was their first house, and they actually still live in this home. And I remember going every weekend for 6 to 8 months straight and seeing the foundation of our home being built from the ground up, and knowing from what my father would tell me, from what my mother would talk about, that the foundation is vital for the rest of the home. And when you think about the word foundation, and that's what I want to focus on today, think about the foundation of your own life. What's the foundation of your life built on?
What's your worldview? What do you put your hope in? Because in the end, that's going to matter most, or maybe not so much in the end, but right now, as we go through some of the most questionable and uncertain times like never before, not because we've never gone through something like this in human history, but right now we're going through this in this time in the history that we're living in. What are you building your foundation on? I love what Ravi Zacharias says when it comes down from the perspective of our own life and our foundation. He says this: the foundation on which you build your life is the only thing that will stand when the storms of life will come, and they will come. It's not a question of if, but when. I remember January 26th of this year. I remember exactly where I was. I remember it was a Sunday, and I remember I was with so many of you. I was at Rock the Universe 2020, and we had already rocked it out Friday and Saturday, and we were having a great time and going on the hog and going on different rides, and I ate a big old turkey leg that I shared with so many leaders, and I thought I was going to be able to eat most of it, and I was wrong. So thank you, leaders, for helping me with that. But I also remember that morning, that Sunday morning, not just because so many people were at church and I was at Universal Studios, not just because I had so much fun and I was ready to go home and most of you slept on the bus, thanks a lot. But I also remember that morning because through some news outlets on my phone and through the ESPN app and in other ways, I remember getting a notification around 11 o'clock or noon that day, and the headline read this, real simple: Kobe Bryant dead at the age of 41. That shocked a lot of people. That rocked the National Basketball Association. That rocked the world. And I remember watching the tribute on a Friday night at home, and Usher was on TV and he was singing. And I never thought that I would hear Amazing Grace on a channel like ESPN in my life. And there he was, singing Amazing Grace in a tribute to not just Kobe, but his oldest daughter, Gianna, who ended up dying in a helicopter crash together. Now, I think of someone like Kobe. He's a multiple NBA champ. He is just known as the Black Mamba. He's just swift on the basketball court. Right? He was just this amazing star and great at his craft. But I also think about maybe what matters more than that was the fact that he was a husband and he was a father. And he was someone who also had questions like you do and like I do. And at that moment when that helicopter was in its last few minutes of being in the air, and before not only him and his daughter died, but so many others as well, what he was thinking. I can only imagine a struggle to understand in those last few moments if he was going to see his wife again, if he was going to see the rest of his kids, his best friends. And maybe more than anything, I wonder if he thought, what comes after this life if I don't make it after this? Because ultimately he didn't make it. What comes after this life is, I'm sure, what he was thinking. And for a lot of you, you're probably thinking, well, this is really hard right now. What am I called to do at this time? How can I respond as a teenager or close to being a teenager, or so many of you? I know you're struggling because you are about to graduate and you're not sure if you're going to be back at school this year. We're not sure what's going to happen next week. But some of you are discouraged because of that. And how can you do anything if you're not even allowed to leave your house? If you're barely allowed to go to the store, and for some people, they're in certain neighborhoods, I'm already hearing that they're only allowed to walk their dogs and then go back inside. What I want to do is I want to tell you that you're called to live and act even in the midst of uncertainty and trust that God is still a part of it. But I want to show you that for sure through God's word. And what I want to do is I want to give you 3 ways, or maybe even 3 reminders that God has given us in his word for so long to remind us that we can trust in him even in these times. Here's the first thing I want to remind you of from God's word. God calls us to be loving. What does that mean? That means that right now you have more than ever before an opportunity to get into your room, get into any area of your house, and really take the time to go to God and pray to Him and ask Him to guide you and to help you, and to understand that, listen, you're not just praying for your own needs, and you're not just praying to survive this, but you're praying for other people that don't have hope. You're praying for other people that have lost family members. You're praying because maybe you haven't prayed for a long time, or maybe you're praying because you want to have the strength to be able to encourage those in your family that maybe don't know what hope looks like, and the struggle in your household was already bad, and now it seems like it's going to get even worse, or it's been getting worse, and God is calling you to trust in Him. Thousands of people have already died because of this pandemic. Hundreds more are dying every single day, and I want you to remember and understand this isn't something new. This has been the case for a long time. There's been other pandemics. There's been other struggles humanity has had to battle through. Even just in the 20th century in America, 2 world wars with the rest of the world. We've had to battle some really harsh things in the past, like the Black Plague or the flu pandemic in 1918. And that was hard. And more than that, even as a teenager right now, as you're trying to understand these things and you don't really know how to move forward completely, God is still calling us to show love to others. And please don't forget that as people die, the truth is that those that don't know Jesus Christ will be separated from Him for eternity without God if they die not trusting in what the resurrection means, what Jesus did on the cross for those who have hope and know that death isn't the end. Please don't forget that. This is one of the greatest moments in history where people are more open to serious things more than ever. When people are open to talking about life and death, when people are open to talk about whether what they believe actually makes any sense and answers those deep and burning questions that they have going on inside of them right now. This is a time for God to call us out and to love people like never before. So God's calling us to love. Here's the second thing. God is calling us to be joyful. And you're probably saying, how in the world am I going to be joyful at this moment in my life? How? I'm stressed. My parents are stressed. My siblings don't get it. My family members are struggling. People have lost their jobs. And if you're in that boat, I want you to understand, I got a call from my mother and my sister late last week that they both have lost their jobs. And I can only imagine what my sister with 3 little kids is thinking right now, what my mom is thinking now towards the end in her 50s, where the thought of retirement now has to turn into finding a new career. And yet, the Apostle Paul, writing in Philippians, says this, Philippians 4 verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always, and I say it again, rejoice. He literally is saying to the people in Philippi, rejoice, rejoice. And if he could have said it a third time, he would have, but I think he made his point. And I want you to understand that the Apostle Paul is not a person who came from luxury. He didn't come from a place where he's in a palace and he's saying these things because they always make sense. He comes from a position where he was stoned to death at some points, where he was shipwrecked. By the way, this letter that he wrote to the Philippians, encouraging them, comes from a prison cell. This is known as one of the prison epistles because he was in prison, still finding a way without technology and social media and knowing what tomorrow would bring. Found a way to write letters and found a way to travel to other churches all over the ancient Near East and in Europe and in Asia. He found a way to get to those places. And when he couldn't, he would write letters and still encourage people. Even when he was at his lowest, he said that he was going to rejoice, and he called them to do the same. And it's funny because this word rejoice he would use most of the time when he was at his lowest point and when people were struggling through the hardest things. He would say, rejoice. But how's that possible? You're not in school. You can barely go to work if you're working. You can't see family members. You can actually barely even get together with 10 people, although I'm sure some of you are already breaking that. But please, please don't forget about people that are struggling with immunocompromised situations like my wife, or maybe your own grandparents or other elderly people that can catch this. and it can impact them. But I get it, right? This disease could impact my family and my friends, and it already has, and it can impact me personally, and it can do the same thing to you. So how are we going to show love, and how are we going to really show joy when we can't even go out and be together one-on-one or in groups? Because it's easy to get overwhelmed and just pass the time and numb ourselves with entertainment and complaining, or maybe just sitting in our rooms and eating snacks all day. And I get it, because we got some good snacks here at the Sanchez household. But it can't be all about that. God calls us to bring life to people, even in the midst of uncertainty. I was talking to some of the pastors today, and I was talking to Dr. Starkey, and he was in the room, and we love Dr. Starkey, and he said this, and I love this, when it comes down to the book of Philippians, and when Paul talks about rejoicing, Dr. Starkey says it this way: it's not about rejoicing because of our circumstances, but it's about rejoicing because of who God is. Man, that's powerful. I'm going to read that again. It's not about rejoicing because of our circumstances, but because of who God is. What if you stepped up? What if you got your family together and you said, you know what? We're going to do a devotional every single day. Oh, and I am going to lead it. What if you did that? What if you actually took the time and took your family together and just prayed with them? What kind of a peace would that bring to your family if you would take the opportunity to lead in that way? What if that's exactly what helps your parents and your siblings, or maybe somebody online, when you're throwing out so much encouragement that not only is it going to create a ripple effect and impact them for weeks to come, but maybe it will change somebody's life for decades, and they do the same thing to those that are around them, because you stepped up and you stepped out, even with the limitations that are presented before us. All because you decided to be joyful. You decided to do this, to be kind, to serve others, even within the barriers. Isn't this how Jesus spoke of us going out to not just be served, but to serve other people? Jesus did this like no one else for 3.5 years. And all of you who are listening to this have lived way longer than that. God's calling us to love, to be joyful. And here's the last thing. God is calling us to be fearless. Now, right now, that one probably even seems like the hardest one of all. How am I going to be fearless right now? Right? You're thinking, I'm a teenager. If it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't even have food on the table. How am I going to be fearless when my parents, you probably are thinking, don't even listen to me? Maybe right now my parents are being more intentional than ever because of the circumstances. But when this is over, Pastor Tony, it's just going to go right back to how it always was. Or maybe you're just thinking, well, finally my parents are getting it. I don't know what you're thinking right now, but God is calling us to be fearless. Not just to focus on ourselves, but to be fearless and understand that He's calling us out. I believe this is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call. But before I get to that, listen to what Paul says earlier in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. He's struggling. He's gone through so many different things. He's encouraging the church. And in this, he's struggling still, because he knows that if he wasn't alive at that time in church history, he would be in heaven with Jesus. But at the same time, he knows that his work's not done on earth. And I love what he says in Philippians 1, verse 21. He says this: "For to me," this is him speaking, "to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Do you understand what that's saying? What Paul's saying is that while he's on earth, he's going to pour himself out. He's going to do all that he can to help people, to reach people. But ultimately, what's going to come out of his mouth, what's going to come out of his actions, what's going to come out of his life is going to be a life represented of everything whom God is and what Jesus has done for him. He's going to do that. And he knows that towards the end of his life, when he died, that he was going to meet his Savior, that death wasn't the end. And while he was on earth, he had a purpose, and he was going to fulfill that purpose fearlessly. Not because of a reward, not because he didn't have any other choice, but man, he was just so grateful. And he knew the love that God showed him, so he showed love. He knew the joy that God had given him and he had experienced, and he wanted other people to experience that joy. And right now he's saying, I'm going to be fearless, because Jesus was fearless even to the point when he went to the cross, and he still, at that point of death and struggle, prayed and asked God to forgive those people that did not understand what they were doing. We're called to be fearless. This is going to be a trying time for so many people. This is going to reveal a lot of hearts. This is going to show where people are at spiritually, where they haven't been, what they've been hiding. It's going to impact people on a massive scale. And like I said earlier, I believe this is a wake-up call to the masses. God is calling us back. He's calling Christians to offer hope like never before. He's telling those that are running, if you've been running, you've been ignoring God, you've just kind of been doing your own thing, this is your opportunity to come back or to really give your life to Him if you haven't done that already. Many Christians have been neutral and God's calling them to action. And it's easy to think, well, what's my purpose? What's God trying to show me? Or for a lot of you, you're always asking, well, what's God's will for my life? Here it is. God is getting all of our attention right now. And what are we going to do, right? Some of you have asked for a sign. Well, here it is. This is more than just a sign. This is a call to all people to wake up. This is God's megaphone through all this suffering and struggle like C.S. Lewis talks about. Getting our attention, calling us to love, calling us to serve. That even though we're quarantined, there are ways to be the church online and through so many ways, even at home, even with some family members that we don't always get along with. God is calling you to be the church. Here's the last thing I want to tell you before we close. I want you to be safe. I'm doing everything I can to protect my wife. You know, some of you, if not all of you, know what my wife has been through the last year, and to know that she's already made it over a year with her brand new lungs, and to be healthy, and to know that once again she has to stay indoors and not do much is so hard for her, but she still picks up the phone and calls her family, encourages them. She's going to the Word, and even when she's struggling and she's tearful and she's saying, this is so hard, she's still willing to wake up the next day and pray and serve God. I want you to be safe, but I also want you to be brave. Don't waste this opportunity, and I promise you, and I'm going to challenge myself as well, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to live, and I'm going to love, and I'm going to be there for my wife like never before, and I'm going to do the same for you guys on a weekly basis like never before. And I'm going to trust that God is doing something in this, that it's more than just about death. It's more than just about uncertainty. And it's more than just about thinking that there's no hope or hoarding up toilet paper. God is doing something, I believe, right now that's special. And it's not so much asking, why is God allowing this? But maybe the better question is, what is God doing through all of this as He's calling us back home? I love you guys. I'm thankful to be the pastor at Grace, to be a light at Berean, and I hope that you'll join me as we help so many people that are far from God. And if that's you, don't waste this time. God's getting your attention and He's telling you, come home.